Hello everyone, today we're going to be taking a look at the Theologia Moralis, Treatise 3 on the Precept of Charity, Dubium 5 on Scandal, Article 2. We did Article 1 last time. Today we're continuing with Article 2. This is going to be the last video from Alphonsus on the subject of clothing that I make for a while. The next ones are going to be on Tertullian and then eventually Clement of Alexandria. Okay. Table of contents. This is, the table of contents. When can passive scandal be permitted? When does utility alone suffice to seek a loan from a usurer and sacraments from an excommunicated minister or a sinner? Whether at some time we are held to omit or delay spiritual goods to avoid the scandal of another. Whether at some time we are held to omit certain precepts. Whether we are held to dismiss temporal goods. Whether a woman would sin gravely wearing a men's clothing, other cases. Whether a girl that is decently dressed would be held to avert herself from the sight of a particular man that desired her. What if she were to clothe herself in superfluous dress? What if she thought some men in general were going to be scandalized? And would women sin gravely by showing their breasts? How would one sin? Composing obscene things, either representing them or painting them. Whether it is lawful to persuade a lesser evil to avoid a greater, and whether at some time it will be lawful to permit the ruin of one's neighbor. First, when can passive scandal be permitted? Remember, passive scandal is scandal received. So, there's active scandal. This is the person that provides an occasion of sin for another person. And then passive scandal is the person who receives the scandal. They are the one who sin on account of the scandalizer or the active participant. Passive scandal cannot be permitted without necessity, either of one's own advantage or the advantage of another. We are held by charity to impede sins if we can do it easily. So if you have no good reason to permit passive scandal, you must impede it. You must prevent the passive scandal from taking place. Now, what exactly constitutes one's own advantage or the advantage of another is something which is going to be very context dependent. But just in general, you are held to impede passive scandal if it's something you can do. First, loans. Receiving a loan or the sacraments from a sinning priest or sacraments from a schismatic priest is sinful. This is because the usurer or the priest or, the usurer or the priest are likely to sin per accidens as a result of you asking for a loan or receiving the sacraments. So, in cases of necessity, it is permissible to receive loans or sacraments from a sinning priest or a schismatic, but in general, this is something that should be avoided. I want to make a quick note here that usury is real, but it's not incredibly expansive. Don't freak out if you have like college loans or something. That's for another time. Delaying spiritual goods. So this is a case where you delay spiritual goods in order to avoid scandalizing another person. So if you receiving some spiritual good would be an impediment to someone else, should you delay your spiritual good? So first we distinguish, is salvation in danger? So if the spiritual good is salvation, you are never held to avoid scandalizing the other person. If your salvation is in danger, you're actually obligated to take whatever action you plan on taking. So if salvation is in danger, delaying is not an option. It's obligatory that you do not delay. However, if salvation is not in danger, again, we distinguish. Is the scandal received or given? So this is passive scandal. Is the passive scandal received or given? So if it's given, then it would be reasonable for the person to be scandalized by what you do. If it's received, then it would be unreasonable. If it is given, if it's reasonable for the person to be scandalized by what you're doing, then you're held to delay the spiritual good. Now, this delay only needs to be held on to until you are able to give a warning to the other people what you're going to do, or a certain period of time based on your conscience. You can't delay spiritual goods forever, but you can delay them at least for a short period of time in hopes that the stumbling block will be taken out of your brother's way. If it is received, though, if it is unreasonable for them to be scandalized, there is no reason to delay. Receive the spiritual good at earliest convenience. There is nothing you can do for a Pharisee. The priesthood. A father wants grandchildren and would attempt to prevent his son from becoming religious. This is the situation. They should be ignored. If you think you're called to the priesthood and your father would prevent you on account of wanting to have grandchildren, not only should you not ignore him, but in some cases you shouldn't even consult him. Now, I do not counsel this lightly. You shouldn't just ignore your parents willy-nilly, and you shouldn't fail to consult them on important things like this. However, if it's a serious enough situation where he would actually attempt you to prevent you from becoming religious, then you should simply not talk to him about it. Do not treat an irreligious man about holiness, and with an unjust man about justice. Okay. The omitting of precepts. Should you omit certain things that would normally be obligatory to prevent scandal? So first, if it's to prevent scandal and it's obligatory that you permit scandal, then the other obligation doesn't exist anymore. The scandal would outweigh the other obligation. So say you have a tradition of not eating meat during Lent, right? You go over to a friend's house, and at the friend's house, they're not Christian, and they serve you meat. You are obliged, or you could be obliged, to forego your fast. You might actually have to eat meat out of charity for the person who made it for you. And in this way, you would be omitting your obligation to eat meat, but it would be because the obligation no longer exists. The obligation doesn't exist because you have a greater duty not to offend the person that is providing you food. Then there are two opinions about the week. So say you have an obligation like the one just mentioned, and you're in a case where it's kind of reasonable that the other person takes scandal, but not entirely reasonable. This is the week. Are you obliged to dispense with your other customs for the week? The two opinions are obviously that the obligations can or cannot be dispensed with. Alphonsus takes the second view, but both of them are very probable, or at least probable in general. Cases settled. Okay. Prelates cannot be held to omit certain practices necessary for the maintenance of the church, neither for the Pharisees nor for the weak. If you might have to allow scandal for weak people or Pharisees, people who receive scandal, who want to be scandalized, if you need to allow that for the maintenance of your church, so much the worse for them. That's not a good enough reason to prevent taking care of Christ's church. Giving up temporal goods for scandal. So are you held to give up temporal goods like a meal or having fun, a vacation, something like that, on account of scandal? No thought should be given to Pharisaical scandal. Again, the Pharisees do not determine how you act. If they want to take scandal, they will. For cases of scandal of the weak and normal scandal, it depends. Depends on whether the good is personal or of another, and it depends on how great the value of the good is. So if it's the good of yourself and it's not a great good, then you are held to withhold or delay, at least for a time, receiving the good. On the other hand, If it is something of great value, or if it is the good of another person that is at stake, you are held out of love for them to follow through and permit the scandal. This is often going to be a case of prudence in looking at individual situations. More cases. Cross-dressing, if not done from necessity, is at least a venial sin, in public, of course, and private too, likely. If it is done with the intention or danger of lust, it will be a mortal sin. Pretty simple. If you cross-dress in public, you are committing a venial sin. If you cross-dress in public in some sort of way that might provoke people to lust, or you intend for them to lust, that would both be grave matter. Those would be mortal sins. Point 2 here, I admit defeat. The translation of this passage makes no sense to me. And when I found the Latin and I tried to get the Latin translated, that also made absolutely no sense to me. So I do not know what Alphonsus was saying at point 2 here. Point 3, a wife ought to omit fasting once or twice on the offense of her husband. So this is a situation like the one I described earlier, where you go over to a friend's house and you have to omit your fast for being with them. Now, you cannot, in situations like that, be held to omit the fast permanently, except in case of serious danger or something like that. But if it's a daily life kind of thing, the wife might have to omit fasting once or twice as to avoid offending her husband, but she should have a conversation with him about it and clear it up so that she can continue fasting in hopes of not offending her husband. If fights happen at the church on holy days of obligation, or days you're supposed to go to church, you are not held to attend. You're not supposed to put yourself in danger, either of sinning or of causing other people to sin in situations like that. So you are allowed to avoid churches on days like that. Though, I don't know of any days such as this. Maybe this is something which has been common in the past. I would not know. I'm very confused by the inclusion of this as a point here. And then finally in this section, a superior is competent to ignore the sins of inferiors if ignoring their sins prevents further evils from arising. So if for some reason someone in authority notices a sin happening with one of his inferiors, he is allowed to ignore it, but only in cases if it will prevent further or greater evils from arising, if he cures their sin, or if he helps to. Dress. Hey, it's about this. It's what the series is about. Wow. If a woman appears in public with knowledge that her appearance will cause scandal to a particular person, is this a grave sin? In normal cases, such as spending time with friends or going to church, the sin would be venial at worst. And then in cases where the scandal is easily avoidable, it would be grave matter for at least a short period of time. So remember the thing about the wife who talks to her husband and tells him, like, hey, I'm going to fast. Things like this where, like, just normal clothing, which is generally suitable for a person, if appearing in public like this is going to cause scandal to a particular person, there should be some thought given to them. So, if there is another way to walk, or another church to attend, or another article of clothing to wear, or something like that, these are all good options for the woman to take, but it's only necessary that she take them for some short period of time, in hopes that she will be left alone by the man in question. She's not bound to do anything further than that. Now, if she is vain about having admirers of this kind, or she goes to places just because she knows they'll be there, then it becomes grave matter, then it becomes a mortal sin. But in simple cases where she's just trying to avoid the other person sinning and she's just going about her normal life, it would be a venial sin at worst, often not a sin at all. And this is, of course, in a situation where the dress is like a general acceptable kind of dress. It's not like something bad. Again, if a woman dresses according to her state, so she dresses properly, but knows that a man will lust after her, would it be grave matter for her to fail to attempt to avoid contact with him at least a few times? The answer is, if it can be easily done, then it should be done, but if it is not easily done, it will not be grave matter. However, similar to the case of vanity in the last section, if she wears superfluous dress or has vanity, then it becomes grave matter. There is no right to superfluous dress or vanity in the same way that there is a right to do things like go into church or go out into public. Wearing superfluous dress is not something which is necessary for the maintenance of ordinary life, and there is no right to it, so it's not something that you can do licitly if you think that it'll cause other people to sin. And then broader scope. So those last two situations were situations where there was a particular person, but what about in general? What if you were in the same situation, but the question was about men in general rather than a particular man? It would not be grave matter to do something like wear makeup or a superfluous dress. So this would be a case of like, okay, if you want to wear something extra and you don't know of anyone specifically who will lust after you, then that could be permissible. It would at least not be grave matter, though it might be a venial sin, but even that is unlikely. There is a couple exceptions here. Extreme foulness. If the excess is real excess, like if it's covering yourself in ridiculous amounts of makeup, wearing overly revealing clothing, this will be grave matter. This will be a mortal sin. Okay, and then a warning. While it is technically possible to show cleavage, at least to some extent, without mortal sin, it is almost never the case. Alphonsus wants you to know you are in no way special. He actually leaves a warning here where he says, like, he's talking to priests because it's all about like priests in confession, like this is how they should diagnose the sins of the people that come to them. Like he tells them, like, hey, so it's technically possible to wear clothing like this without committing a sin, but like it almost never happens, and you should be very, very careful and more or less assume that a mortal sin has taken place if you're talking to a person about something like this. Yeah, you are not special. You do not have perfect intentions. Okay, custom and cleavage. Is it always grave matter to uncover part of the breasts, as they say in the book? So this would be a case where it's customary, it's normal for women to, in public, show like a large portion of their chest, though not all of it, for like normal customary reasons. Like this is just how people normally dress. So Alphonsus actually says, no, it's not a sin in all cases. So first, he says that women who introduced this custom, the first early adopters, all sin mortally. That is grave matter. That is a mortal sin. Starting a custom like this is evil. Next, it is possible to be so immoderate as to be a sin in all cases. So if you are uncovering yourself more than custom, or if the custom is just unbelievably bad, then it can be a sin. So this would be where you intend some kind of immoderate uncovering. And then if it is not too extreme and it is a custom, women should be reproached even if they are not condemned for mortal sin. So in a case where it is customary and the woman simply follows the custom without any ill intent, she should be reproached for dressing in a certain way which exposes too much of her chest, but she is not condemned as sinning mortally. So there is something important here which is noted in the text. So the priests are recommended to reproach this sin and root it out. And if there is a custom in a certain area for women to dress in a certain way, it's not necessarily a sin for them to follow custom. However, the custom should be changed. And after being warned, the women should no longer follow the custom. They should aim for a higher standard than the one which the culture gives them. So simply following the culture itself can be fine, but after you've been reproached, after you've been warned that dressing in this way is sinful, or it can be seriously sinful, then you will be bound to the new law. You're no longer bound to the custom. You're bound to a higher standard of dress than you were before you were reproached, either by a priest or by someone who knows what they're talking about. Next, what about cases where people put on lewd plays or create pornographic art in public or post it in public? This includes movies. It is a grave sin to put on plays with too much sex in them. Plays, movies, shows, stuff like that. If there's sex in your show, don't put it on in public. Probably don't put it on in private either. There are technically cases where you could watch something like that without sin, but they are few and far in between. Again, you are not special. You are not the person who is capable of watching these items without being tempted to sin. It is a case of near occasion for you, and you should avoid art which is suggestive, art which is too lewd. The next two cases are kind of interesting. This is a case where you have to know whether it's licit to persuade someone to commit a lesser evil rather than a greater one. So can you lawfully persuade or permit someone to commit a lesser evil to avoid a greater evil? Now, the first opinion says no, because the sin would be positively willed. So if you have a case where a person says, I'm either going to fornicate or eat myself to death, and you're like, wow, those are both really bad, but if he fornicates, at least he won't kill himself with food. Hey, you should fornicate, don't eat yourself to death. That would be ruled out. You're not allowed to permit someone, or persuade someone rather, to commit an evil, even if it's so they don't commit another evil. Now, there is one qualification to this, which is to do with virtual containment. So think of the sin of adultery. You are fornicating with someone, but you're also fornicating with someone who's married. Then thus, it is a worse sin than if you simply fornicated with someone. So in a case where your friend is planning on either committing simple fornication or adultery, you are actually allowed to persuade him to commit simple fornication rather than adultery. The reason is that simple fornication is contained in the sin of adultery. Adultery is like a more specific version or a worse version of fornication. So when you will the person to commit the sin of simple fornication rather than adultery, you're actually willing the positive good, which is not adultery. Don't commit adultery. And then the second opinion says, yes, because what is willed in the case of the lesser good is formally good aspect of the act, which is found in the fact that it is a lesser evil. So the second opinion denies this, and it says that actually in all cases, you're allowed to will that the person commit the lesser evil rather than the greater evil. This is not quite correct. I have put my own opinion in here because Alphonsus in the text actually endorses multiple different aspects of both opinions, and he doesn't actually put up a third opinion, so I put them together for him. So the correct opinion, as far as I can tell, is that it is the first opinion with a distinction. So it's true that you cannot positively will someone to sin, and it's true that you can persuade someone to sin in a lesser sense because of virtual containment. They would have committed a greater sin, but now they will commit simply part of the sin they originally intended. So the intention isn't towards the sin, but it's toward the lack of the greater sin. However, there is a difference between that and the difference between gluttony and gossip. So between adultery and fornication, one is simply more sins added on to the first. However, with gluttony and gossip, there is a difference in species. These are two different kinds of sin. They're both positive things. It isn't a simple case of addition and subtraction. So when you will for one of them to be chosen rather than the other, this isn't a case of virtual containment, so you're positively willing a different bad thing take place. And then finally, some cases. A son is permitted to steal by his father, so he may be punished and never steal again. Pretty self-explanatory. The father allows his son to steal. The son is punished, and he never steals again. Good thing came out of it. And then finally, can you place an occasion of sin for someone? So this is similar to the case above where the father allows his son to steal, but in this case, you actually set up the situation. And it depends on how it's done. If you intend some good through the sin caused by the occasion presented, it is illicit. If your intention is indifferent to whether the sin is actually committed, then it can be illicit. So you cannot intend that the person actually commit some sin, but you can hope that if they commit a sin, then something good will come of it. So you cannot set up the situation with the intention of the person sinning. That will be all for today. Next we'll be doing Tertullian. I hope you've learned something.